Good afternoon. I am Subramanian, the CEO of Voom Flights, an Airbus company. My original plan for today's talk had been to tell you about Voom, tell you our story, and explain what we're doing and what we've learned from the 5,000 passengers that we've flown today. But what we realized is that we have a much bigger opportunity with this austere audience to tell you about how Airbus is thinking about urban air mobility and how we believe that this revolution is truly coming. So let's start with some data. Does that work? Nope. Let's try this. Yes. At Airbus, we have a lot of data. We have data about where people are and where they're going, how they move through the skies. We have data about who's building what infrastructure and where. And we have data about how these trends are going to evolve. And about 5 years ago, some very smart people in Toulouse started looking at the data. And they said that the next 10 years, the 2020s, are going to be the biggest period of urban migration in human history. By 2030, 5 billion people will live in cities, 60% of the world population, up from 45% today. If that's true, places like Sao Paulo, Mexico City, Jakarta, which are already stretched to the limits on their infrastructure, are only going to get worse. And all these new megacities are going to be tested in their ability to move passengers and people through the cities. And so what we started to think about and think in earnest about was, what are our alternatives? We can dig, or we can take to the sky. And so at Airbus, being Airbus, we realized that urban air mobility was going to be part of this future trend. I'd like to start with a case study, Sao Paulo. So my business, Voom Flights, today flies passengers, dozens of passengers, every day in Sao Paulo and Mexico City. In Sao Paulo today, it costs you about 150 reais to go from the airport to the city center, a journey that in the best case scenario takes an hour, and in the worst case scenario can take up to 4 hours. With us, for a price of 450 reais, 3 times the price of the taxi, you can fly from the airport to the city center in 12 minutes. And what we found is people really like that value proposition. They like it so much that we've taken the offering and we've rolled it out to Mexico City. So why now for an urban air mobility revolution? So people have been talking about urban air travel and the Jetsons for decades. But why do we believe that now is the right time for urban air mobility to happen? Well, let's start with the helicopter landscape. So globally, there are slightly more than 30,000 helicopters, of which about 7,500 are light single aircraft, a small portion of which are on air taxi tickets. That system's not scalable. And so we need to look at next generation technology. And what we believe at Airbus is that next generation technology is here. So this is a projection of our view on how flight hours will increase as technologies evolve. Okay. So at Airbus, we're looking at 6 major enabling technologies. So distributed electric propulsion, which gives you redundancy at the rotor level. New kinds of structural concepts, everything from composites that will make their way into design to all kinds of new architectures. We're looking at advanced avionics and autonomy, air traffic management being a big part of the problem. We're looking at infrastructure. So today there's about 30 cities worldwide that are zoned for air traffic, for urban air travel. Cities like LA, Sao Paulo, Jakarta. But there's a lot of cities that aren't, and a lot of cities on those lists aren't. So how do we think about next generation infrastructure to enable urban air mobility at scale? We're also thinking about advanced business models, like my business, Voom, and also businesses around how do you actually move and maneuver aircraft through the urban sky. And most importantly, we believe that the connected passenger is a technology that will enable us to move forward. At Airbus, we think deeply about creating value across the value chain. Our objective is to really unlock the urban sky, but to do it in partnership with a lot of companies and with other institutions. So when we look at the urban air mobility value chain, we find 6 major components. The aircraft, which is our bread and butter, and support and services to maintain that fleet of aircraft. Flight operations, the actual dispatch of the aircraft to go pick up the customer, which we know from our experiences at Voom is non-trivially complex. We're also looking at air traffic management through our company NavBlue and also through a project we're running at A-Cubed, our incubator, that is thinking through next generation UAM. And we're looking at ground infrastructure. So how are we, as I mentioned, only 30 cities in the world are zoned for urban air traffic today. And so how do we think about next generation infrastructure? And finally, the passenger solution. This is a screenshot of the Voom app. And we are running a portfolio of projects. We've been thinking about urban air mobility in depth for the last 5 years. And in 2015, Airbus set up an incubator here in Silicon Valley called A Cubed. At A Cubed, we've been working on an array of projects, including Vahana, our a flying vehicle concept, Voom, which is a passenger solution, Altiscope, which is working on next generation UTM. And we are also making investments in other parts of the group. So at Airbus Helicopters, we're working on next generation vehicles. In Airbus Defense and Space, we're thinking through drones in the UAS macro context. So we are really focusing on how can we help and enable this service to come to life. We believe that one of the most important things that we need to focus on is air traffic management. So these are some images from San Francisco. So today, the picture on the left shows you what the traffic looks like in the Bay Area on an average Thursday. But if you believe what the studies are saying, the projected UAS traffic over San Francisco Bay, you're going to have 5,000 vehicles flying at any given time of day. As an example, in Sao Paulo today, we have a dedicated helicopter air traffic control run by DSEA, the military air traffic organization. There are 2 controllers that manage the movement of aircraft in a city. And they've decided that 6 aircraft is the maximum aircraft that they can manage within a 6-kilometer radius of the Congonhas airport. That system doesn't scale. Same thing in Mexico City. You've got 2 guys and a dog managing a system of helicopters in a city of 22 million people. How do you go from that system to a system where you have 1,000 or 5,000 vehicles flying? This is something we're thinking deeply about. So one of our projects, Altiscope, recently put out a blueprint for urban air traffic, which was published in September. That's worth a read. And it gives you an idea of how we think the regulations will evolve. Another big constraint on the system is VFR. So today in Sao Paulo, in January, they have banned, as of January 1st, they banned IFR landings at the airport for helicopters. And if you dig into it and you ask why, the reason is that the system was just too complex for the humans in the loop to manage. And that's not a system that's scalable. So we need to really think deeply on how we're going to evolve from today's completely analog air traffic management system to something that really enables vehicles at scale. We have a project called Skyways, which is an initiative that comes out of Germany that is beyond visual line of sight drones for package delivery. We are working with the National University of Singapore on building out a platform that enables us to test package delivery for the Postal Service in Singapore. This is an example of a UAS project, but the learnings from which will feed into our thinking on UAM. My business, Voom Flights, is live in Sao Paulo and Mexico City. We've flown more than 5,000 passengers to date. But what's most interesting about Voom are the lessons that we're learning about how people move and why they are taking the journeys that we're taking. What we've learned is that in Brazil, people have a lot of luggage. They don't necessarily like to admit it, and so they'll show up at the helipad with 5 pieces of luggage to go to Disney World, and we'll tell them that we can't fly them because today's aircraft doesn't support that. But we're also learning about how and why people use it and what the timelines look like. We also require passengers to give us our weight. We've also learned that most people lie about their weight, so our algorithm now adds 10 kilograms to make sure that the aircraft is properly balanced. So we also have a self-piloted eVTOL demonstrator called Vahana, which is a project coming out of the Silicon Valley incubator. Vahana had first flight in February, and there's some pretty cool videos on YouTube if you want to check it out. We have another piloted demonstrator called City Airbus, which is being run out of Germany. This is a piloted vehicle, but focusing really on developing the electric technologies that will enable it to happen. So at Airbus, we think long and hard and deeply about safety. And so we're doing a lot of work on the back end to think through what a safe system might look like and working with regulators around the globe to help explain what we believe or to come to a common understanding of what a safe system might look like for an urban air traffic future. So my final message is that we're taking an integrated approach to the sky of the future, and we are really interested in collaboration. So we believe that we can't do it alone, and we're working with partners and everyone from universities to startups, and we'd love to hear your ideas. We have a separate venture arm based in the Valley that is working with some really creative startups, and we would love to hear your input. We are taking a proactive role in engaging with regulators around the world and helping them to think through what this might mean for them in the 10 to 15-year time horizon. And we would love to hear from you and love to hear your thoughts going forward. That's it from me, and I'm happy to take any questions.
That's great. Do we have any questions? We have one on Slido, which is, what is your definition of zoned for urban air travel?
So that's a great question. So for us, when we think about urban air travel, we're thinking about, or at least the use cases that we think about. I'll talk about it from a geographic point of view. What we typically find is that journeys of less than 10 kilometers are not really worth it, because the challenge of getting to the heliport, getting up to the vehicle, taking the vehicle and coming back down is not worth it. So what we're really focusing in on are journeys between sort of 10 and 500 kilometers. That's how we're thinking about the scope for urban air travel. I'm not sure I answered the question, but hopefully I did.
Yeah.
10 to 500 kilometers. Yeah.
Great presentation. I've taken the Voom product in Sao Paulo. It's wonderful.
Yay.
And saves an amazing amount of time between the airport and downtown and vice versa.
Awesome.
Aside from technology, which I think is what we're hearing a lot about today, I think you're bringing up some pretty practical and I would say substantial challenges in terms of Mexico City, in terms of Sao Paulo, and perhaps elsewhere, where the system's in place, the guy with the dog, or two people to run a system of 6 helicopters, is a real impediment to growth.
Yeah.
What is the plan, or is there a plan to help manage the transition from a very manual system today in terms of control to perhaps a more automated one that will facilitate really some amazing growth opportunities? But the system today, whether it's regulatory or people or other systemic problems, is really in the way of that.
So the way we think about this, we kind of divide like likelihood of acceptance, right? So it is quite unlikely that you're going to get a massive fleet of vehicles over the Sao Paulo metropolitan urban area anytime soon, right? And so we think about it in phases. Our approach is to go and work with the regulator and to kind of proactively lay the groundwork, but also to find pockets of opportunity. So the Brazilian regulator, it turns out, is not particularly concerned if you have a high volume of flights over the Amazon, right? They're kind of less concerned about it. And so our approach is to find a geography and really sit down with the regulator and understand what is the realm of the possible and how are they thinking about this problem, and to give them a framework for thinking about this problem. The reality is that urban air mobility will not be one global solution. It's going to be local solutions by city, by country, and it's not all going to happen at once, and it's going to happen in phases over time. So in Brazil, there's a specific set of software and technology that powers their air traffic system. And so it's going to be a case of sitting with them locally and working through what the evolutionary process is. So there's not like a comprehensive answer. It's a very local sort of problem.
Uma, you've got a load of questions on Slido. So why won't Airbus partner with Uber? You are, aren't you?
We are open to partnering with anyone, but we have been looking at this ecosystem for a long time, and we think we've got some interesting ideas and interesting opportunities for collaboration. We haven't said that we won't, but we're not at the moment. We're working with some of the other ground transport partners that are interested in this space.
What is the number one challenge that will impact time to market the most?
So from my point of view, time to market, I'm assuming, is a question around electric VTOL. So from our point of view, we only fly aircraft. We only work with the best operators, licensed Part 135 operators that have a track record of safety. From my point of view, the challenge here is really around certification and being able to prove that the new systems are as redundant and as safe as the vehicles that we have in operation today. That's how I think about it.